right, I just thought I'd make a quick little refresher video for you guys about solving equations. So I'm going to talk about one-step equations, two-step equations, and then multi-step equations. I'm going to hopefully give you guys enough examples that you are able to then try some on your own. I would hope that after watching this, if you had some questions still, you would reach out to me. I would also hope that while watching this, you would take some notes over it so you have it in your notebook so you don't always have to open up this video for these refreshers. So we're going to start with one-step equations. When we're solving one-step equations, all that means is that in order to isolate x or whatever variable, you only have to do one thing. So if we start by looking at number 1, the only thing we have to do is get that 8 away from the x. We want x to be by itself, and we want 8 to be back over with its friend, 15. So in order to move 8 over with its friend, we have to do what's called an inverse operation. So if we're adding currently, the inverse, or the opposite of that, would be to subtract 8. The reason we have to subtract the 8 from both sides is because if we added 8, we would just have 16 rather than canceling it out and having nothing left there. So we see there that they cancel out. We're left with x equals 7. And that's all you have to do for that problem. That's your solution, x equals 7. Our second example, -7 plus x equals 3. So again, our goal is to isolate that variable. We want it to be by itself. So we need to cancel out that -7. Having a negative is the same as subtracting. So in order to do the inverse, you have to add 7 to both sides. Whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other side. So we know that -7 plus 7 is 0, which leaves us only with x equals 10. And again, we have x by itself, so we're done. Example 3 is where it gets trickier for some people. We need to get x by itself, and when we have a fraction, that means we're dividing. So right now we have x divided by 4. And if I asked you what the inverse of division is, hopefully you would all know that the inverse or opposite is multiplication. So in order to undo that division, we need to multiply both sides by 4. And I want you to remember that multiplying by 4 is like multiplying by 4 over 1. Okay, so these 4's cancel out, and the reason for that is because we get 4x over 4 equals 12, and 4 divided by 4 is 1, so that just leaves us with x equals 12. And we should know, back in our original problem, if we did 12 divided by 4, we should have ended up with 3. Our final example is 3x equals 18. Anytime you have a number right next to a variable, that means you're multiplying them. So to undo multiplication, we have to divide. So to undo this, we need to divide both sides by 3. Essentially what you're trying to figure out is what number times 3 gets me to 18. So here they cancel because 3 divided by 3 is 1, and you're left with x equals 6. And that's your answer there. Then we're going to move on to two-step equations. I'm going to do 2 different examples of two-step equations. So this first one, we have 5n plus 5 equals 45. So again, our goal always is to get the variable by itself. At this point, the variable is still connected to the 5, but we need to get rid of this 5 before we can do anything else. So we see that it's adding, so we have to do the inverse, which is subtract. Whatever I do on one side of the equal sign, I have to do to the other, to that friend. So since both the 5 and the 45 do not have a variable, they are friends. So I didn't do anything with my 5n. It comes straight down, and I'm left with 5n equals 40. If we remember back, now we're at a one-step equation. We only have one step remaining. So you should know that a 5 next to an n is 5 times n. And in order to undo multiplication, we're going to divide. And we need to divide both sides by 5 so that n can be by itself. 5 divided by 5 cancels out, and we're left with n equals 8 because 40 divided by 5 is 8. If you want, you can check your solution by substituting 8 in for n. So over here, I'm going to check it. 5, oops. Sorry. Okay, so 5 times 8 plus 5 equals 45. So 40 plus 5 equals 45. 45 equals 45. So you know that your solution is correct. All right. Our second example is similar, except this time it's 5n minus 5 equals 45. So again, our goal is to get that n by itself, but right now it's connected to that 5. So we have to do our first step to get it alone, which is get rid of this negative 5. A negative 5 is the same as subtracting. So in order to undo that, we have to add 5 to both sides. Our 5's cancel here. We're left with 5n equals 50. Once again, we have to get rid of the 5 that's connected to the n. 5 times n, inverse, is 5 divided by 5. Those 5's cancel out, n equals 10. And again, you can substitute that in like we did up above and check your answer. The final topic we're going to talk about are multi-step equations. I'm going to go through 3 different examples of multi-step equations with you. My first example has parentheses, and when we see parentheses, we should immediately know that we are multiplying the number on the outside times everything that's on the inside. So in this case, we're multiplying negative 6 times 1, which is negative 6, and negative 6 times negative 5v, which becomes positive 30v. It's very important that you notice that it's a negative times a negative, which creates a positive, equals 54. Now we're at just a 2-step equation. We have 2 steps left to get this problem so it's v is by itself. So we have to get that negative 6 over with the 54. So we have to do our inverse operations. If we have a negative, we have to add. Remember, if you had negative 6 and you took away 6 more, you'd be at negative 12. So these wouldn't cancel out. You have to add. We didn't do anything with the 30v, and now we have 60. Down to 1 step. Our final step, divide both sides by 30. V equals 2. Our next problem is similar. This time though, we have a variable on this side as well as on this side. First step, always when we have parentheses though, distribute or multiply times everything inside the parentheses. Once again, we're dealing with a negative and a negative and a negative. So negative 8 times negative 8x is 64x. And negative 8 times 6 is 48. And now we're adding that 48 because it's a positive. And adding is the same as having a positive number. We did nothing on the other side of the equation, so all of that comes straight down. Okay, from here, there are multiple ways you could start. You can start in 4 different ways. I'm going to start by adding 6x to both sides. I like to get my variables together. So since it was a negative 6x, in order to cancel it out, I have to add it and I have to add it to its friend, which is 64x, which will give me 70x plus 48. I didn't do anything with that 48, equals negative 22. Make sure you are aware that that's a negative 22 and you bring that negative sign down or you will not get the correct answer. Now I want to get 48 with its friend. And since I'm adding it, in order to move it over with the negative 22, I have to subtract it. A negative minus makes a bigger negative. So we're going to have negative 70 equals 70x because our 48's canceled out. Our final step, divide both sides by 70. X equals negative 1. So those of you watching, is that negative important? Hopefully you all said yes. It makes a big difference if it's a negative or a positive, especially if we're talking about bigger numbers. All right, my last example, I guess I have two more. My next example, again, I have distribution. This time though, I'm dealing with all positives. I would make sure that you are drawing those arrows so every time you remember to distribute to both parts, because a lot of students have answered questions like this number 3 incorrectly because they've said like 10 plus 3b instead of 30b. You need to make sure you're distributing to both parts. So from here, I want to get the friends back together, and that's the 10 and the negative 20. So I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides. And remember, when you subtract from a negative, it gets even larger negative. So it's negative 30. We're getting further away from 0. We're losing more money. Last step, divide by 30, and b equals negative 1. Our final has no parentheses. It's really similar to up here in number 2, the second step of number 2 right here. There are 4 different ways you can start, but again, I like to get my variables together as friends. So I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides. I didn't do anything with my 15 or my 10, so they come straight down. These cancel out, and then 6x minus 4x leaves me with 2x plus 15 equals 10. Now I need to get my 15 and my 10 together. And remember, since I'm adding 15, I have to do the inverse, which is subtracting. I have 2x equals negative 5. My final step is to divide by 2. X equals negative 2.5. Or you can write it as x equals negative 2 1/2. Or leave it as x equals negative 5 over 2. Any of those 3 are correct. Okay, so hopefully this was a good little refresher. If you have any other questions, I really need you guys to reach out to me. This whole virtual learning thing is going to be really tough, especially if you have questions and you're not asking. So please just make sure if anything comes up, any questions, or if you want to redo anything, that you reach out and you let me know, and I can communicate with you through whatever method works best. I really recommend you get on that Remind app. It's really slick for if you have questions, you can send me your work and I can talk to you about what you did wrong. Or if you would like to do a Google Hangout with me so that you can see me and we can talk through a problem, I'm fine with that as well. Just make sure you're reaching out and not getting far behind. All right, guys, I hope